We're back at it again with another Anthem minute. It's your voice, Salvajee from the Salvajee Cartel. This video was a little bit crazy to make because as soon as I finished it, the March 12th patch basically dropped in Anthem. So all of the changes that we were going to get in March 12th are finally live in the game. And the footage you guys are going to be seeing in the background is going to be Grandmaster 2 footage with my melee interceptor build. I can officially say, my friends, melee is finally great with the interceptor in Grandmaster 2, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be great in Grandmaster 3 as well. So I'm really happy that those changes came in. I just want to point out also, guys, I am aware that Bioware increased the drop rate for masterwork and legendary items, but according to a lot of Reddit posts, after we got this patch today, the drop rate for masterwork and legendary items have basically been decreased to where they were, which is why in this Anthem minute, I decided to, of course, cover some of the news when it comes down to the most popular posts in the Anthem subreddit that break down why the progression system in Anthem is sort of broken, and most importantly, also very shady. I mean, some of these testing that these people have done honestly got me a bit scared, and of course, I hope Bioware is 100% on this and they're able to bring us a good looting system soon into this game. Anyways, let's get straight into the video. Non-endgame activities, after you go down, you can actually respawn after 10 seconds. And on endgame activities, after you go down, you can respawn after 30 seconds. Clearly, there's not going to be any whites and any comments. They have also removed the vault from the forge, the vault being the place that you can mass dismantle many things. One of the changes that I'm very happy about is that they actually did some balance changes to Titans. Anyone that is a hardcore Anthem player knows that Titans were not really sort of fair to fight against. They were really unbalanced. So they changed the damage mitigation of Titans from 100% to 70 to 75%, of course, depending on the damage type. They also increased the amount of time that a weak point is going to be sort of showcased on the Titan. Lesser Titans are always going to be having a weak point now. You can also prime Titans and therefore combo them, and they also increased the weak point damage on Titan. They also improved the fireball collision that the Titan has. They also decreased the radius of that fireball, and basically what this means when it comes down to your gameplay is that the fireballs are no longer going to be hitting you, even though you have been dodging them for a total of 55 hours, and they still somehow find a way to actually hit you. So that is, of course, pretty amazing. Let's move on forward to more changes. Now, if you freeze a Scar Enforcer or a Scrapper, they can no longer move. This was a serious issue, specifically with my melee build. Sometimes I would freeze Enforcers and they would still be moving. Another great change is that the monitor's health has been greatly reduced, the keyword being greatly reduced. So basically what this means is that now the monitor on the Heart of Rage stronghold isn't going to be a huge bullet sponge, and with the Titan changes, that means that the Titan that you fight at the beginning of that stronghold, of course, you're also going to have an easier balanced time. So I cannot wait to finally start running the Heart of Rage. Let me give you guys a small spoiler when it comes down to the story. Again, spoiler alert, there will be a story spoiler coming up. You have been warned. So at the end of the Anthem campaign, we killed the Monitor, and we thought that the Monitor was the leader of the division. Fun fact, he is not the leader of the division, and there are actually multiple Monitors in the Dominion, as you guys can see by this codex entry that comes from the YouTuber Quizzle. He completed the Champion of Tarsus challenge. Mad respect to him, because that probably took a long time. And yeah, he got this entry for the Monitor that specifically points out that there are multiple Monitors in the Dominion. Let's get back into the news though. Melee, combo, ultimate, status effects, and proc damage have received a buff. On top of all that, when you spawn into the world, you will no longer have the notification that your super is ready when it's actually not. Interceptor Aura will now deal the correct damage. Wind Wall and Bulwark points will now, of course, take more damage, but will only last 20 seconds. They used to last 60 seconds. The Burst Mortar for the Colossus received a huge buff from 145 damage to 300 damage, from a 10-second cooldown to a 6-second cooldown. The Flak Cannon also received a buff from 30 base damage to 42, and the Wraith Strike also received a buff from 200 damage to 250 damage, and now the Wraith Strike will be applying the elemental effect of the aura that you have on. What does this mean? If you have the Ice Aura, you use Wraith Strike towards a target, you will then freeze that target. Weapon buffs. Let's talk about the weapons that got a buff. Ralner's Blaze, Rolling Carnage, Cycle of Pain, Last Stand, Glorious Result, Insult and Injury, Sentinel Vengeance, Granora's Palm, Vasa Surprise, Shooting Touch, Renewed Courage, Artina's Gambit, and that's pretty much it. Those are the Masterwork weapons that have received a buff. And I just want to point out, Bioware did point out that they haven't fixed the health UI bug, but they are working on it. Alright, now that we covered the news, so let's take a look at Anthem's extremely flawed loot system, and of course how the community is reacting to it after a lot of testing. This guy goes on to say that after 4 days of killing thousands of mobs, he has received no legendary drops. He basically goes on to say that he has killed a lot of enemies, including rabbits, and again, not a single legendary has dropped. Now, the reason for that is, and the reason why he goes on to point out that post, is because there's another Reddit post in Anthem that this guy says he has gotten 44 legendaries within 50 hours of playing the game. And this player basically went on to say, if you just do free play strongholds and you basically kill all of the elite as well as the legendary enemies, your chances of getting masterworks and legendaries are going to drop. He does also point out that there is a chance that, you know, it could be RNG. But it's quite not RNG. In fact, I actually tested out his method. I went into dungeons in free play and I got nothing at all whatsoever. But there's a reason why I didn't get no masterworks and legendaries after an hour of doing free play dungeons. Because your chances of getting better loot in Anthem gets reduced from doing one activity over and over and over again. And before I actually went on to try that method, I actually did a lot of free play with my interceptor. So this other Reddit post comes from the guy called Chazahan Cock, and he basically goes on to say that from his testing, he has noticed that he did a lot of strongholds, and basically he realized that his loot just got worse and worse and worse, and he wasn't really getting a lot of actual loot. And then he goes on to say that he believes Anthem has a matchmaking rating system when it comes down to loot. Long story short, he stopped doing a lot of strongholds and then he started doing, you know, free play dungeons and events, and he noticed that his loot actually increased. But the more he did that, of course, the less better the loot got. So he went on to do 6 strongholds, and the loot that he got from strongholds was actually pretty good. And then of course he went back to free play and farmed free play, and he actually happened to get a pretty decent amount of masterwork items as well as legendary items. So very, very shady already. But on top of all that, as you guys know, I made a rant a couple of days ago talking about how sick and tired I am of Anthem's loot and progression system. I will not be making any more rants like that on the channel because, quite honestly, if we want this community to improve, we need to start, focusing on of course, how we can improve the community. I don't want a lot of negativity to be in my channel when it comes down to Anthem. But anyways, this next Reddit post comes from this user, Purple Marvelous, and he goes ahead and points out this meme, and this meme is what I made my rant video on because I'm really tired of getting dead inscriptions in the game. Alright, the perk system in Anthem is completely irrelevant and basically doesn't let you progress at all whatsoever. But someone that is 10 times smarter than me and 10 times better at proving a point than me went on to post some constructive feedback on Reddit, actually explaining in an in-depth pattern how extremely flawed the progression system in Anthem is, and of course how it is that Bioware can change it. Keep in mind, guys, I will be giving you guys the summarized version of this guy's post, but you should absolutely read it because he goes on to point out a lot of rational points of views. So let's get right into it. He goes on to point out this flowchart right here. The blue area represents where a lot of players are actually at right now, and the epic area, or the purple area, represents where a lot of the casual players are at. This is why a lot of casual players, in my opinion, should shut their mouth when it comes down to this problem. Every time I talk about the loot and system in Anthem and how flawed they are, they go on to say that the loot system isn't a problem and it's a good thing that it's taking a lot of time to progress. But the truth is, they're not really on the blue section, they're just in the epic section, and that's why of course they're really ignorant when it comes down to all of their arguments. But the point is, this dude goes on to say that this is an actual problem in Anthem because it basically doesn't give any actual progress towards the players. And he goes on to say that there are so many builds in Anthem and yet no way to actually progress them, something that I have of course actually said. Furthermore, this guy goes on to lay down a graph on the inscription problem in Anthem. I'm really glad he did that because I think Bioware needs some sort of visual on how players are feeling, and this dude put the nail in the coffin with this chart. He basically goes on to say ways that they can go about fixing this terrible inscription system is to give us various alternatives when it comes down to getting loot. He also said that it would be good if we get focused farming for legendaries and masterworks. So in other words, if you want a Truth of Tarsus, just go do the Heart of Raids. He also goes on to say that it would be better if Bioware would allow us to re-roll inscriptions, and it would also be better if they would also increase the loot drop amount. And in my opinion, like I said on my rant video, I think all they need to do is just fix the inscription problem. I shouldn't be getting 3% damage on my inscription. This is something that the team is working on, by the way. They did confirm it, but I still think as a community we need to drop our feedback to the team on how we're feeling when it comes down to progression. Specifically, what this guy also went on to say. He goes on to point out why I disagree with the notion that this will kill the game, because a lot of casuals have been always giving that argument, specifically every time that I've talked about Anthem's terrible inscription system, right? A lot of casuals say you're just going to be OP too quickly, but this guy actually drops factual evidence. The reason why fast progression, and not even fast progression honestly, just progression in general, again, something that Anthem doesn't have at the moment. He said that the reason why this progression is going to make the game better and why it's not going to be killing the game is because there are multiple javelins in the game, and of course you can have multiple builds towards javelin. This means that you will need more inscriptions, focus for each build, which means that you can have, of course, multiple items and of course grind after multiple items, and I absolutely 100% agree on him. He also goes on to say that this is not going to be killing the game because content updates in Anthem, like we saw on the roadmap, are going to be adding things like new guns, etc, etc. And of course, lastly, he just points out that he can ignore things like crashes and glitches, etc, etc, but he just can't deal with the fact that progression in Anthem is non-existent, just like, of course, I pointed out on my recent rant video. I wanted to talk about this on this Anthem Minute because as a community, it is our job to be very vocal about the problems that are plaguing this game, specifically problems that the casual players are not dealing with at the moment, and specifically problems that we don't want the casual players to be dealing with. At the end of the day, this loot discussion is all about making the game better, and that's what we need to understand as a community, and that's why we need to keep talking about how we can improve the loot system in Anthem. If you guys enjoyed this Anthem Minute, drop it a like. I'm sorry that this Anthem Minute was a bit long, but it was honestly a really informational video. Peace out and see you guys in the next one, and feel free to subscribe for more quality videos like this.